So today, we're starting a new series, Better Not to Marry. Better Not to Marry. And I just want you to know that this is a series, this is going to be a series over the next 5 weeks, 6 weeks. This is going to be a series for anyone who is married. Okay, that's kind of obvious, right? Anyone who is married, and however your marriage is doing, however long you've been married, this is a series for you, so don't miss a week. This is also a series for anyone who is divorced. Anyone who has been married and is now sort of reconciling that and trying to navigate, this new season, or, how do I go through this? This is also a series for anyone who is single. Anyone who is not yet married, anyone who would like to be married one day, or maybe newly single and now what, or anyone that's looking at remarrying, okay? This is a series for you. And this is also a series for anyone where it's complicated, okay? You're not sure what you are because of the things going on in life, where you want to go. You're not sure. This might be a series, really, for anyone. If you just care about marriage, and you care about the direction of marriage, and you care about, your parents, and you care about your siblings, and you care about your friends, this is a series for anyone who just cares about what healthy marriage looks like. So, Tiffany and I have been married for almost 14 years, my wife. We have 3 children together, and hands down, best decision I've ever made. I love her so much, and I know what you're thinking, because I think this too, is how in the world did you convince this wonderful, sweet, beautiful woman to marry you? I don't know. And on top of that, I'm actually hard to deal with. I know, shocker. Could you imagine? I'm hard to deal with. I really, really am. And so I'm even more shocked that she is married to me and stays married to me. But just like you, marriage over the last 14 years, we're trying to do this right. We fight, we argue, we have a lot of fun, we have a lot of inside jokes, we have, sweet, loving moments. But just like you, we're trying to figure it out. Just like you, we're trying to do this right. And so in all the years of my marriage experience, I've learned something. I want to share that with you. Marriage is hard. It's so hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's so hard. Think about it. 2 different people with different struggles and different strengths and different weaknesses and different desires and different dreams and different visions and different needs coming from different families come together to form a unified one. That's hard. That's crazy hard because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of working stuff out. But here's what I want to say. It's hard. But it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. Now, do you believe that marriage it's hard and worth it? Do you believe that? See, every civilization has concluded those 2 things. Marriage is hard and it's worth it. Because throughout all of human history, the idea of marriage, the institution of marriage, has been present and has outlasted everything. Now, it certainly hasn't been perfect. There have certainly been some very important changes to it, and there certainly have been some very bad changes to the idea and the institution of marriage. It's looked different in different cultures, times, and places, but every culture has marriage because it's hard and it's worth it. Now, since 1980 here in the United States, there's a shifting attitude towards marriage. And most of the information about the share comes from an article I read in The Hill. But basically, the summary was that people now, since 1980, are marrying later in life or they're marrying less. That was kind of the big summary. So basically, people in 1980, the average age for a man to get married was 25. And for a woman, it was 22. And now the average age is 30 for men and 28 for women. Also, kind of the sweet spot of, middle age, I guess, 25 to 54. 2/3 of the population in 1980 was married. And now it's about half. And so people are marrying later or they're marrying left. And on top of that, 1 out of 10 couples are actually living together and are not married. So there is a shifting attitude towards marriage that is in our culture. And I sort of want to word it like this. I feel like our culture is starting to think, maybe you are starting to think, maybe it's better not to be married. Maybe it's actually better not to be married. Maybe it's better to wait to be married. And maybe you're married right now, and hasn't this happened to you in the middle of a fight, in the middle of a hard season, in the middle of a rough patch? You've maybe thought to yourself, maybe it would be better if we were no longer married. Maybe it would be better if I was married to someone else. Maybe it would be better if we took a break. Maybe you've thought that. Why is this attitude toward marriage growing? It's always sort of been present, but it seems to be growing. And somewhere along the way, the hard realities of marriage have turned into some hurt for people. Maybe you've been hurt by someone or hurt by marriage. Maybe marriage, a good marriage, has never been modeled for you. And so how do you even do this? Maybe you brought a struggle into marriage and it's making it hard. Maybe after you got married, there was a challenge that came up that nobody imagined, and now it's causing it to be difficult. Maybe, let's just be honest, you just weren't prepared, You didn't know what you were getting into, you didn't know what you didn't know. Or after you've been married for a while, maybe they changed, Wouldn't it be better, maybe? Like, what do you do? Because every married couple is here or has been here, or maybe you were married and you know what I'm talking about. What do you do when you realize that marriage is hard? It's hard. Now, even God's people, the Israelites, fostered an attitude, I believe, that it's not better to be married. They were actually, in the first century when Jesus was around and teaching, there was a pro-divorce mindset that was present. And the religious leaders all came to Jesus, and they wanted to test Jesus on the subject of marriage. And what Jesus says in this exchange, it's so eye-opening, it's so inspirational, and yet so challenging, and it's going to be in the face of your customs and our culture, and it was in the face of his culture and their customs as it related to marriage. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 19, and this is what Jesus says about marriage. Matthew chapter 19, verse 3 and following. Some of the Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful? Is it okay? Is it okay in God's eyes? Am I going to be on the up and up? Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" Now, before we really dive into this text, I want to just expose something. And it's what the religious leaders are doing. They're coming to test Jesus. So their purpose in coming to Jesus is not pure. They want him to say what they want him to say, or they want to get him to trip up so that they can turn the people against him. So, because Jesus is the authority on marriage. Not you, not your feelings, not our culture, not legislation, not what they say. Marriage is grounded by the foundation given to it by its creator who actually conceived the idea. And so we all have to just kind of stop and go, are we coming to marriage like the religious leaders were, hoping that we can get Jesus to side with us? No, we're going to sit under Jesus because they wanted Jesus to validate and justify their cultural practice, which was widespread, for divorce. And they weren't seeking Jesus to say, hey, let us divorce for any and every reason. No. They wanted Jesus to say, hey, it's okay to divorce for good and compelling reasons, because that's what we do. And that's what we've been doing. And that's, kind of what we've done for centuries now. And so as they encounter the idea that marriage is hard, they started to practice divorce. And they were bumping into another hard, and they say it in their question. They want to be able to stay lawful, right with God, holy, follow his commands, and without being faithful. That's what they were trying to do. Hey, how can I be on the up and up with God and terminate, this not working hard marriage? That's really hard to try to do both of those at the same time. But they thought maybe we could keep the law and not stay faithful in our marriage commitments. Now, this posture, this is how they're coming to Jesus. This is part of the problem. And Jesus is about to address all of this. Verse 4, haven't you read? So whenever Jesus says, haven't you read, he's usually about to redefine or recenter what the correct theology and application of that theology is going to be. He's about to deconstruct what they've interpreted as true and say, okay, this is what it means. Haven't you read that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female? Verse 5, and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so that they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Period. Jesus is telling you what he thinks about marriage. Right here. So before dealing with the question on, divorce and what constitutes, justifiable grounds for divorce and what to do when marriage is hard and all this kind of stuff, he hits rewind for the religious leaders who should have known all of this. He says, here's the original vision. Let's go back to that. This is what, this is the definition and the intention of God. God created marriage, and marriage, when God made it, was good. And it still is good. So he looks out at Adam and he sees something missing. And so he creates human relationship and specifically marriage relationship. And I'm so glad he did. Because what an amazing, amazing thing that God envisioned. So he defines and he gives you his intention. He wants to give humanity, he wants to give you a really important relationship. Let me just define marriage before we keep moving along, but here's how I'm going to define it. Marriage, according to God's definition and intention in Genesis chapter 2, as Jesus just quoted, is between a man and a woman in a committed relationship to experience a special vision of intimacy in order to carry out his purpose, and it should never be separated. That's what Jesus is saying here. This is the vision. This is the definition and the intention of marriage, and nobody gets to change it. Nobody gets to tweak it. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter, what situation you point to. This is the vision of marriage as ordained by God. So that's his answer when they ask him about the lawfulness of divorce. And so here's their response. Verse 7, why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, and this is so important, so important. Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because Jesus is about to tell us why people divorce. Because your hearts were hard. Not because I intended it, but it was not this way from the beginning. This wasn't my intention. This wasn't my vision. No. Moses permitted it because your hearts were hard. And so the people, the religious leaders, are asking Jesus, well, Moses permitted us to do this, and you're saying we shouldn't, and we have this loophole to be lawful without being faithful. Why doesn't that work? Then Jesus really cuts deep. He says, don't you know the difference between permission and commission? See, permission is like consent, Somebody coming to you and asking you permission to do something. Hey, can I do this? Hey, can I do this? Hey, I'm not sure. Can I do this? Commission is like an official sending out to accomplish something, right? We're together on a mission. We're going forward. So Jesus is reminding them, because they had got this twisted somewhere along the way, God wasn't commanding you to divorce. He was rather letting you concede. Well, shouldn't it be surprising because God gives us free will? He's letting you concede. So there was an attitude of people coming to God saying, hey, God, can I? Can I do X, Not a really good attitude or posture when we come to God to see what we can have permitted to us. Rather, it should be more, hey, God, what's the best? What's your vision? How can I align with your vision? So from the beginning, God's vision and commission for you and for me is for us to be lawful, to do what's right, and to be faithful. That's what he envisions for you and for me. Because permission, that's like a concession. It's like a white flag that we raise up. And we hope that we can justify the reasons. Because marriage is hard. And it gets so hard that we want to be able to, concede it sometimes. And Jesus corrects the view, which is the view that they were hoping to justify, that marriage isn't too hard. Rather, your heart is too hard. Your heart is too hard. Marriage isn't too hard. Your heart is too hard. There's an attitude to concede because we've conceived in our culture and our experience a hardened heart. See, you might think right now, what you have going on in your relationship, it's a marriage problem. But actually what's going on is a heart problem. It's not a marriage problem. There's something hardened in your heart. What causes a hard heart? Well, somebody who has a haughty or a prideful spirit of, I don't need to, you're familiar with what a haughty spirit is like. It's like, I don't need to surrender to that. I don't need to submit to that. I can do this on my own. I don't need to listen. Or maybe what's causing a hard heart is a hurt. You've been hurt in your marriage. And you're harboring that hurt, and it's keeping you hard in your heart. Not excusing the hurt, but it's affecting the way you approach marriage. Now, maybe you have a hopeless outlook, which can harden your heart. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what he does. I can't change. He won't change. This won't change. That's a hardened heart. Or maybe it's more so you just have some habits in your life that harden you both towards the things you need to have a healthy marriage. See, when your heart is hard, this is what Jesus is talking about. When your heart is hard, you look for ways to concede rather than ways to fight. You look for outs. You look for loopholes. You look for permission because this is too hard. Maybe there's a happier way out there. And if I can just get out from under this, and if I can, stay lawful without staying faithful, then I want to do that. And Jesus is here to say, that's not how this works. Verse 9, I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. And so Jesus, again, the authority on marriage here, he says anyone who separates or breaks from God's vision of marriage in any way, well, that's that's a sin commits adultery. We're breaking from God's vision. See, divorce happens because someone sins. Someone doesn't hold up their end of the marriage covenant. Someone lies. Someone neglects. Someone tires. We harden in our attitude, and it affects the marriage. And here's what you need to know. Divorce breaks the heart of God. He's so broken over the state of your marriage right now. He's so broken of your irreconcilable corners that you've moved to. He's so broken because he knows it's caused by a hardened human heart. And he wants more than anything to heal your heart. Now, I want to say real quick about this passage because some people view it this way, and it's not. This passage is not the exception passage. This is not the loophole passage. This is not the permission passage. Jesus just talked about how permitted to one other person. Jesus does say it could be grounds for divorce if there's a sexual breach, but it's still not the vision. It could be grounds. If you were to read 1 Corinthians 7, you would find some other potential grounds. I'm not going to cover them extensively, but you can go read that on your own. But basically, Paul co-signs this, and he says, hey, when an unbelieving person leaves you and abandons you and, is the divorcer, and you're not the at-fault person, then you're probably in the clear. If you're been married and now you're unmarried or post-married, he encourages you, hey, it's probably good that you stay single now. Because doing a second marriage is challenging. Not that you can't. He just says, I think it might be better for you. And then finally, Paul says, hey, if you've gotten divorced, you had a marriage that didn't go well, and divorced in an unexception-worthy sort of way, it's actually better for you to marry than to do other sins. So if you're going to fornicate or any of those kinds of things, then maybe you should go ahead and get married, because either way, there's a problem here. And so my whole point in saying all this is Jesus, this has to be in our hearts. Jesus is wanting to lift your view of marriage. Jesus is wanting to point out that the problem is our heart, that we're not willing to fight for the vision that God has intended. And Jesus, to those leaders, is saying, hey, you need to fight. In this text, it's just so amazing because Jesus lays out how hard it is right here and there. And here's what the disciples say. If this is the situation between husbands and wives, like it's forever and there's no way out and you need to stay committed, listen to what they say. It's better not to marry. Who can do this? It's so hard. Nobody does this. Jesus is shouting to us. And that's what the rest of this series is going to be about. Jesus is shouting to his culture. He's shouting to our culture. He's shouting to you. He's shouting to your marriage. He's shouting to your future marriage. He's shouting to you as you consider divorce. He's shouting to you as you heal from a broken marriage. He's shouting to you if you're interested in marriage. Here's what he's saying. Hey, don't concede it. Don't concede my vision for marriage. Here's what you need to do. Commit to fight for it. Commit to fight for it. If this is your heart attitude of, I don't know if I want to commit to fight for it, then maybe it is better not to marry. If you don't view it as highly as Jesus is raising it, maybe it is better if you don't get married, because Jesus is saying, do you understand all the things that are happening as it relates to getting married? See, marriages fail when we fail to fight for it, when our hearts harden. So, how do you fight for marriage? How do you fight a hardened heart? I want to give you 3 attitudes that will help you overcome a hardened heart towards marriage. The first thing you need to do is you need to surrender me. Surrender me. If you're going to fight for it, if you're going to fight for us, you have to surrender me. And so what you need to do, if you haven't already, is you need to admit what's hard in this marriage, what will be hard in my future marriage, is me. It's my heart. And it's my tendency toward myself. That's what you need to do. And you can't really go further than admitting that, you know? And so what does it look like to surrender yourself for us? Well, you need to surrender some false views. You see, a lot of us view our spouse as our opponent. Okay, you win. I'll let you have your way. Your spouse is not your opponent. You need to shift that view. You're not in war with them. You're in war with your heart. See, your spouse isn't here to complete you, to fill your every need, to bring you happiness and bliss every day of your life. They're not the thing that's missing to complete you. We're sold that, but I promise you, you will never be fully complete just by inserting a human person into your heart. Because your spouse cannot compete with the place that God can only have in your heart. And sometimes we do that. We view our spouse as being able to provide for us only what God can provide. Only the joy that God can provide. Only the stability that God can provide. Only the identity that God can provide. See, your identity is not your relationship. It's your relationship with God. And so we got to correct some false views. So God created marriage to complement you. To complement you. See, your spouse, I think this is going to help. Your spouse is who God wants to use. You never thought about it this way, maybe. Who God wants to use to make you like him. That's not how we view it, though. This is who God's given me for me. No. It's who he wants to use to make you like him because he has what you're missing. And she has what you're missing. You sort of need each other. And so the next time she sees your weakness and points it out to you, here's what you need to think. Here's your attitude. What a gift. What a compliment to me. And the next time he describes your flaw, your attitude needs to be, what a gift. He's making me better. We need each other's vantage points because we have blind spots. And right now there's some attitudes that we have towards our spouse, if you're married, that has the potential to destroy your relationship. And they're not helpful. And they're causing you to harden. It's not that they're not accurate, they're just not helpful. And so what do you need to do now? You need to surrender your bad attitudes in your relationship towards the person that you're committed to spending your life with. And some of the bad attitudes sound like this. Because they didn't, they will pay. I'm going to make sure they know how hard I work. I'm going to make sure they remember never to screw up this way again, rather than showing mercy. Maybe this needs to be your attitude. Even when they don't live up to their end of the deal, even when they, don't do everything they promise to do, even when they don't, maybe this needs to be your attitude. I won't play that game. I will uphold 100% my end of the marriage covenant. I will honor them, even when they don't honor me. Maybe that needs to be your attitude. See, what do you need to concede in your heart so that you can fight for it? Healthy marriages always have an attitude of surrender. They value the we over the me. And I'm telling you, once your heart tastes a surrendered we versus a selfish me, you will see What God hopes you see is it's actually better. It's better for you. The second attitude you need to adopt here is you need to take a step to surround it. Surround your marriage. How are you going to fight for your marriage? You need to surround it. Let me ask another question. Let me ask it this way. What are you doing to fortify your marriage? To protect it. What are you setting up right? What's set up to protect it, to nurture it, to help it grow? You see, here's the thing, and I'm guilty like you sometimes. You've invested in your finances. You've set up all kinds of things so they can grow and sustain and all of that. You've prioritized the kids. You've made sure they've gotten to where they needed to go. They got good grades. They got up for school, all this kind of stuff. Even your car hasn't missed an oil change. And yet, we don't set up things to sustain our marriages, to help them grow. I like what James Clear says. He asks the question, what if you fought differently rather than more intensely? See, sometimes we think, well, I'm just going to try harder. Here's what he writes. You might be able to work 10% harder, but a different approach might work 10 times better. Problem, but explore a new line of attack. Persistence is not just about effort, but strategy. Don't merely try harder. Try differently. And that's a word for so many marriages in this room. You don't need to try harder. You actually need to change some things up. You need to change the flow of your life. You need to ask, do I have any systems or structures in the organization of my life that are supporting and growing my marriage? And marriages don't work. Marriages fail when there's nothing to lift it up and to keep it focused. What do you need to do? You need to surround your marriage with systems. Surround it. What is a system? It's a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism and an interconnecting networks. Think of your digestive system. It's very, very, autopilot, right? You don't even have to think about it. Think of the solar system. It's an interconnected thing of gravity and, planetational spin and orbit and all of this. You need a system. You need something that functions in your life that's almost, like autopilot. Systems make complicated things more simple, durable, and sustainable. So what system can you set up that will sustain and support your marriage? There's several you could look up. Just start Googling it. But I'm going to give you two really easy ones. The first one is, and this is backed up by a study done at Harvard, not a religious study, this is done at Harvard. And I say this to anybody that I can find that will listen because I believe it's super important. They were researching, is there any indicators, because divorce rate is so high, is there any indicators that will help us show people how to have a healthy marriage? And do you know what they found at this study at Harvard? They found that the number one indicator of a lower divorce rate, a significantly lower divorce rate, is weekly religious service attendance. It's not that shocking because when you come and you open your heart to God, He's softening you. And when you don't, it's not happening. The second thing I'll give you is there was another study that was done. This was done by Pew. It's a little bit dated, but I think it's still good. Is if someone reads their Bible 4 times or more a week, it significantly lowers, really bad behaviors. One of them being pornography, like a ton. But if it's 3 times a week, it actually doesn't really impact much of someone who doesn't read it at all. 2 things that are easy, low-hanging fruit for you and your marriage that could soften your heart. And you could just systematize it. If you just read the Bible every day, if you came to church, those 2 things could soften your heart. You not only need to surround your marriage with systems, you need to surround it with like-minded people. Like-minded people. There's a lot of quotes out there. Maybe you've heard them. I'm not even sure who owns these quotes anymore because so many people have quoted them. But here's the 2 that I came across. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. You're the average of your 5 closest friends. 2 very popular quotes that go out there. Who you are surrounded by might be the single greatest influence on your life. Your behavior, your attitudes, your values, your results, and your marriage. Dr. David McClelland, a social psychologist, says the people you habitually associate with determine, this is so scary, as much as 95% of your success or failure in life. So how are you surrounding your marriage with people who will help you fight for it? And one of the ways you can do that is by joining a life group with other like-minded followers of Jesus who are trying to live out marriage just like you. And so I would encourage you, as we're opening up our life groups for new groups or adding to groups, that you would say, you know what? I need to surround my marriage. I need to fortify my marriage, and I'm going to be in a life group because I know that if I'm around people that have the same values as me, it's going to get better. And so you need to do that. You need to do that. Don't do marriage alone. So many people do marriage alone. If you're in a life group right now and you're having marriage problems, why don't you just bring it up? We need to be here for each other, you know? We need to fortify each other. No one's going to be surprised. And maybe if you're kind of nervous about life group, just try it. Try it for 3 months, you know? If it doesn't work, then quit. But what are you going to do to fortify your marriage? The last thing is my favorite thing. The last attitude you need is you need to commit to a stubborn grit. You need to be stubborn. Finally, we're talking about something I'm good at. You need to commit to be stubborn. You need to have a stubborn grit. If you want a healthy marriage, you need to get stubborn. What do I mean? You need to know what God's intention and definition of marriage is. That it's not flawed, your heart is. You need to believe that marriage is good, and you need a grit. Craig Rochelle defines healthy marriages like this. The key ingredient is not knowledge, it's not skill or desire, but resilience. What is resilience? It's a commitment and a willingness to get back up every day and fight. Maybe what your marriage needs is some resilience. Maybe what you need is some grit. How do you get resilience? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 through 3. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured. He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. How do you get resilience? By fixing your eyes on Jesus and just looking at how he ran. Jesus stayed righteous and faithful to you, to the end. His attitude was pure. His heart was pure. You were first and he was last. See, Jesus looked at what he needed to do to fight for you. And it was suffering, and it was sacrifice, and it cost him everything, and he endured the cross. But he looked at all of that challenge, and he knew this is going to be hard. But it's worth it. Isn't she worth it? Isn't he worth it? Stubbornly in Jesus' heart, he looked at the challenge and he kept thinking to himself, I will give up me for we. I will give up me for we because they're worth it to me. My best marriage advice, the best thing you can do for the we is to follow Jesus closely. The more you know and experience Jesus, the more you will be able to fight for it. Look at his example. How do we overcome a hard heart? especially in marriage. We concede it's hard. Marriage is hard. Sacrifice is hard. Doing what's best for the other person and denying yourself is hard. But we commit to fight. Why? Because it's worth it. It's worth it. You're willing to suffer when marriage is hard because he suffered for you. He gave you a blueprint for how to approach your marriage by how he approached his relationship with you. You keep thinking, they're worth it. She's worth it. So I'm going to keep suffering. I'm going to keep getting back up. This marriage is worth it. God's vision is good. I'm not going to raise the white flag in my marriage. I'm going to fight for it. Come on, husbands. Are you going to fight? Are you going to fight yourself? Come on, wives. Are you going to be patient and loving and honoring and respecting? Come on, husbands. It's worth it. It's worth it. What is God doing? He's making you like him. Just trust him. It might not feel good today, but if you surrender your marriage to him, oh my goodness, he's going to get a hold of you. He's going to get a hold of your relationship. And what is he going to do? He wants to do that in your life. He wants to do that in your marriage. Will you surrender to his vision and fight for it? Hey, would you stand? I want to pray over us. God, we are here today and we want to love our wives like you love us. We want to love our husbands like you love us. We want our marriages to look like the relationship that you have with us. We want to be better at sacrificing. We want to be better at putting the other person first. We just want to have a heart that wants to fight. We're not going to quit. We're going to look to you, and we're going to see your stubborn grit, and we're going to apply it to our relationships. We're going to surround our relationships with people, and we're going to surrender ourselves so that you can do only what you can do.